Happy Tuesday morning. How's everybody doing today? This is Jenny Gallagher with Joyful Heart Healthcare. And I forgot to hang my sweater over my window, so I have lots of distracting lights on my glasses. I apologize for that. I'll try to look sideways. We'll give everybody a minute to get their notifications so y'all can join us. And then we're gonna talk about diabetes today. Kind of a short discussion. You'd think diabetes would be this long, drawn out discussion, but it's pretty straightforward. We're gonna talk about diabetes. So grab your coffee and get comfortable. Let's have a little chat about diabetes. So, good morning, Debbie Brown. Glad to see you here this morning. There goes the train. Everybody wave. At least he's not screaming his horn this morning. Now he is. Further down the line. So, but good morning, everybody. Glad to see y'all. I see numbers going up, but I don't see who's here. Good morning, Sandy. There we go. Starting to see some notifications pop up. So, glad y'all are here. I'm Jenny Gallagher with Joyful Heart Healthcare and with Keto Nurses. Glad y'all are hopping on. Good morning, Cindy. Good morning, Monica. Yay, people are hopping on. Yeah, so that's what we want. Our topic today is diabetes. I know this is a really confusing topic for some, but it's pretty straightforward, to be honest. So we're going to go through a few little things. I don't think it's going to take very long, honestly, to go through this. It's pretty logical and pretty straightforward. So we'll go through a discussion on diabetes. If you have diabetes questions, go ahead and be thinking of those and type them in the chat, and I will stop and answer those questions here and there. But we're going to talk diabetes, okay? Yeah. So number one, what is diabetes? Well, diabetes is a problem of sugar metabolism. That's the easiest and most simple definition. However, it's way more complicated than that inside the body, systemically. There are also a variety of types of diabetes, and if you interact with diabetes patients online anywhere, you will find many of them get really aggravated if you say diabetes in general, especially if you omit the idea of type 1s. Type 1s make up about 10% of all diabetes patients, but they're a very important part of diabetes patients. But they are not the only other types of diabetes. So we have type 1 diabetes, which is an autoimmune dysfunction. It's something in the body that makes your immune system turn against its own pancreas. So it literally just, the body stimulates this army to go in and fight the pancreas, shuts down the beta cells so they can't function anymore. We still don't know exactly what causes that. We think it's some sort of possible genetic link. We think there are some viral links, some other disease links. We really don't know what triggers the autoimmune form of diabetes, which is type 1. There's also type 2, and that's going to be the main topic of our discussion today because that's the most preventable form. There's type 1.5, okay? So that's latent autoimmune disease of the adult. It is type 1 diabetes. It's where the autoimmune disease like type 1 happens, but it happens as an adult, usually in the 20s or early 30s. It's where the autoimmune process is triggered and type 1 develops. It's not type 2. It is type 1, and it happens rather suddenly for most people. There's another kind of diabetes called MODY. It is mature onset of diabetes of the young. So it's basically type 2, but it happens in very young people. originally type 2 diabetes, if you go back and look at literature, type 2 diabetes mostly only happened in patients 50 and 60 years old. It was a chronic disease that happened in older age because it took years for it to actually develop. And so we're going to talk about that process here in a moment. But MODY happens in younger adults, usually in their 20s or 30s, as a really odd process. Almost always it's a link to genetics, but it can just randomly occur. It does not have to be genetic. And so you have to have a provider that knows the right tests to order to figure these out. You have to be able to get them to order fasting insulins and C-peptides. Various antibodies have to be tested. So if you suspect one of these different types of diabetes, you have to find a prescriber that knows about these different tests. But type 2 diabetes is a problem of sugar metabolism. And so what happens is every time you eat carbohydrates, from that very first rice cereal you had as an infant, your body began breaking down rice cereal into glucose, and it triggered a pancreatic response releasing insulin. That insulin then said, oh, you don't belong over here in this bloodstream, Mr. Glucose molecule. Let's move you out and store you over here as fat. So it took that glucose out of the bloodstream and moved it over into fat cells for storage, for future energy use, for whatever possible use the body might have for it later. Some of that insulin, if you've read my metabolic dysfunction article, if you read my peas and cornbread article, my chaos within article, you know that there are other methods of also removing that glucose. So I would highly encourage you to go read those because there are other methods. But we're not dealing with all of that pathophysiology today. We're just talking about this sugar metabolism related to glucose and insulin today. So if you want more information, go to my website, joyfulhearthealthcalls.com, and look for the chaos within, the peas and cornbread, or metabolic dysfunction articles, and they'll give you much more detail about this glucose metabolism issue. Over time, from rice cereal to the crackers you chew on for teething, to the suckers at the, after the doctor's vaccine visits, to the hot dogs at the fair, to the hamburgers at the grilled dinners and parties, to all of the carbohydrates, to all of the mac and cheese, to all of the things we grew up eating as children. All of those carbohydrates, all of them, break down into glucose. All of them. Not part of them, all of them. When carbohydrates break down into glucose, that raises your blood glucose level, and that glucose level continues to rise. Okay? That triggers more and more pancreatic release of insulin. Over time, we become less and less active. When we're little kids, we're burning energy like crazy. We're running the streets, we're playing ball, we're playing soccer, we're racing our friends, we're literally bouncing off the walls, burning energy as we're kids. In college, we're involved in various sports and activities, running and going, we're studying and burning energy. Some of us slow down a little in college and we gain that freshman 15. But as a general rule, the younger we are, the more energy we're burning. Therefore, that glucose we're consuming is rapidly used in the Krebs cycle. Therefore, we see very little glucose rises that stay high, stay elevated, cause problems. Okay? However, look at the last generation or so. The last 20 to 30 years, our population is much less active. Look at our teenagers today. what do? Lots of our teenagers don't play sports. They're not encouraged to get outside and run the streets. Some streets aren't safe to run anymore. It's just not a thing we can let our kids do now. I remember when I was a teenager, preteen, like our whole neighborhood literally would walk the block, playing in the streets, going to each other's houses, because we knew everybody on our block. It's not like that today. So you can't really send your kids out like that or your grandkids out like that. You have to be a little safer and a little more protective of your kids. So that takes away some of that activity that we counted on back then to burn some of those calories. So now we rely more on electronics and more around the house activities. So that poses a little bit of hazard. If you're not using up the energy you're consuming, that energy is getting stored. Remember all those laws of physics, that energy doesn't change. The energy isn't created, it's changed from one form to another. So if you're feeding your body energy that can't be utilized, it's getting changed into a stored form, okay? And for us as humans, that stored form is fat. It's insulation, okay? So once we start doing that, we're creating a little bit of insulin resistance. That little bit of insulin resistance can happen when we're 15, it can start when we're 25, it can start when we're 42. There is no schedule of when that begins. A lot of that depends on our genetics, a lot of that depends on our dietary habits, some of it will depend on our level of activity, some of it will depend on medications we wind up having to take for various health conditions. There's 100 different factors for each individual person that might play a role in how our body metabolizes and uses sugars, insulin, and fats. Everybody following so far? If you have questions about sugars, insulin, or diabetes, type them in. So, there's one type of diabetes that I haven't mentioned yet, and I kind of hesitate to bring it up because it really gets emotional for a lot of people, because as we've talked about type 2 diabetes and how this happens, there is a type 3 diabetes. We talked about type 1, we talked about type 1.5, and we're discussing type 2 as the majority of our conversation today, but there is a type 3 diabetes. Type 3 diabetes has been termed probably for almost 10 years now. It is Alzheimer's disease. So what happens in some people is that glucose and insulin that continue to rise over time create beaver dams. If you read my articles, you know what I'm talking about. Glucose and triglycerides are thick, sticky molecules in the bloodstream. And when you have thick, sticky molecules in tiny little blood vessels, they create these little beaver dams. It's the best image I can give people. And so a beaver dam stops the flow of water in a river or a creek. Okay, so if you know what a beaver dam is, it's easy to picture these tiny little bitty clots of random, like, sticky things inside these blood vessels. So when those kinds of things happen, tiny blood vessels lose circulation. The tiniest blood vessels are what we call capillaries. Capillaries are where oxygen is dropped off and waste products are picked up, and those are all over the body. The most fragile of those capillaries are in brain tissue. So when those kinds of plaques and beaver dams kind of things begin to form in brain tissue, people forget things. The neurotransmitters don't fire properly. Memories begin to fade. people forget faces, they forget feelings, they forget who you are, they forget who I am, they forget to take their medicine, they forget to turn the stove off, they forget to put the car in park. They start forgetting little things at first, and then over time, those forgetful things become worse and worse and more hazardous to their health. During that process, that definitely poses safety hazards. And that's usually when family members become really concerned. Lots of times confronting that patient presents serious anger issues, very defensive issues, because they can't think properly. They know something's wrong. They really do. They know something ain't right, but they're really afraid of what that might be. And so they're really going to lash out when you try to help them. It's really a very scary situation to be in. So, but type 3 diabetes is what we now know Alzheimer's to be. So if you are dealing with any kind of diabetes, what do you think the easiest fix is? Like if your problem is high glucose and high insulin, what's the easiest solution? Who wants to fathom a guess? If you test your glucose at home and it's 156, what do you do about that? Diana, you're right, but it's not just the sugar. I've had patients come to me and say, I've been off sugar for 2 years. Why is my glucose 160 in the morning? I haven't eaten sugar in years. Why is my sugar still so high? It's not about the sugar. It's not the sugar. It's grains. You're right, Debbie. It's about the bread. I've had people say, but what about Ezekiel bread? That's healthy. No, it's not. Test your glucose. Go buy a glucometer. Go buy a glucometer. Glucometers are over the counter. They're about 40 or 50 bucks. And test for yourself food products. Buy something. Take your glucose before you eat it. Eat it, and 2 hours later, test your glucose. See what the difference is. If your glucose number changes more than about 10 or 12 points, it was too many carbohydrates. Done. You know that product is not a great product. That's simple. It's very logical. It is very simple to do. If that is how you need to figure this out, do it. It's simple. I know to a lot of people, a $40 meter might be pricey, but for most people, we can come up with 40 bucks to go buy a meter and a few strips. If you're worried about the strip cost, talk to the pharmacist. Sometimes paying a little more for the meter is worth buying cheaper strips. Talk to the pharmacist. They will help you choose the less costly option of the bunch. Okay? Got a couple questions here. People don't realize rice, potatoes, yes. Bread, corn, rice, potatoes, noodles, pasta, oats. People all the time say, what about my oatmeal I have for breakfast every morning? Check your glucose. One bowl of oatmeal can raise glucose as many as 50 points in some people. That's not healthy. Whoever said that was a healthy rise? That is a spike. It's about the same spike you would get from some candy bars. Not good. So, Sandy, there's not an average glucose number, okay? Our ideal optimal fasting glucose number is about 85. However, I say that with this huge big caution. Once you cut carbohydrates out of your lifestyle, the liver will decide it's going to help. So then you're going to get fasting glucoses that go higher than where you were, because the liver is going to try to release extra glycogen stores to raise that glucose back up. So let's do an example. If your glucose level had been running 150 fasting all the time, and your previous prescriber said that's fine, it's no big deal. It's not fine, because we know that damage, organ damage, brain, kidneys, eye, heart, we know that organ damage begins around 126 or 127. Okay? So 150 is definitely not okay. You already have end organ damage at 150s, if that's pretty consistent. So if your glucose is running 150s and you cut carbs, it won't be surprising to me to hear that the next 2 or 3 mornings, your fasting glucose is suddenly 162, 171, 156. Like, it's not going to surprise me one bit, because the liver is going to like, oh my God, what happened to my glucose? Like, I'm addicted to this stuff. I need it, need it, need it. So it's going to quickly spit out a lot of glycogen stores to get that glucose back where it where it wants to be. It got used to those higher levels, therefore it's going to try to help you get there. It can take about a year to 18 months for that problem to go away. That is why I don't really give much attention to a fasting glucose number. It's pretty useless if you've cut carbs. If you haven't cut carbs yet, that's a good number to start with, because that will tell you how unhealthy your fasting glucose is. If you're still having 50, 60, 80, 100 carbs or 300 carbs a day, your fasting glucose is a pretty good number to tell you how sickly your body is. Okay? But ideal, optimal, goal fasting glucose is about 85. Other than that, we don't have average glucose numbers. We want to optimize your glucose by seeing only a 10 to 12 point change before your meal to after your meal. That's what you want. So a reading that's put on your lab tests, that won't help you understand what your glucose is doing. You need to know what food is doing to your glucose. That's how you will know what your glucose metabolism is doing. Okay, your A1C, we talked about A1Cs a couple weeks back. You can go look at that A1C discussion. There are lots of A1C charts on the web. You can look at some of those. Some of them are graded green as in good, orange as in, ooh, this is not great, and then red as in, oh my God, this is terrible. But typically the ideal A1C is 5.5 or less. The lower the better. Some people even say 5 or less is the ideal optimal A1C. Because at 5.5, you're having some glucose numbers above that 126, 127 number some. And if that's steady, then you may be getting some mild organ damage that we can't see, we can't detect, we don't know about yet. Okay? So it's all about trying to optimize the numbers to optimize your health. The cell is what makes the body healthy. If the cells are sick, if the cells can't get glucose, if the cells can't get oxygen, if the cells can't get insulin, if the cells can't get iron, if the cells can't get protein, whatever the ingredient is that your body's missing is going to drive disease. That's what it boils down to. So when I tell patients, when I'm talking to you as a patient in your visit, and I say your proteins are low, your D is low, what I mean is the cells are starving for the proper ingredients. That's what it boils down to. Does that help, Sandy? Told y'all this was going to be a short discussion. So you should take your glucose reading before you eat and again after you eat. Yes, there's an article on my website, joyfulhearthousecalls.com, about testing your glucose. It's really simple. You test before you eat and after you eat. What I generally teach is this week, do all breakfast. Next week, do all lunch. Next week, do all supper. That way you're not killing your fingers. If you try to do them all before and after every meal, you'll kill your fingers. If you can get a prescription for a CGM, a continuous glucose monitor, that's ideal, because that will help you learn, but it won't kill your fingers. You won't have to test every single time as much. You have this little device you stick on the back of your arm and use your smartphone to connect with it and talk to it, and you have a chart, a graph that will be created with your glucose number. So ideally, if your number is 80 before a meal, it shouldn't be higher than about 90-ish after your meal. If it is, there's too many carbohydrates at that meal. That's the simplest way to manage your diabetes. If it's more than that, you need to figure out what kind of carbs you had, where were the hidden carbs, was it a recipe you tried that you didn't know about where the carbs were, was it something you ate at a restaurant and there were some hidden carbs, was it a salad dressing that you that you either bought or was at a restaurant and didn't have, so you didn't have a label at the restaurant, so you didn't know there was a bunch of sugar in there. Like, sometimes you can't really help what is in a food if you're out and about, if you're choosing to eat on the run. Couple rules about eating out. If you're eating out, always ask questions. Assume it's an unhealthy product. Just always assume. Most restaurants cook according to mainstream nutrition guidelines, meaning they're not going to use salt very much, and they're not going to use healthy fats. That means that all of your salad dressings are going to be low fat. All of them. If there's no fat in their salad dressing, I can promise you there's sugar. That's the only thing that provides flavor in your salad dressing. So if your salad dressing is low fat, I can promise you there's sugar in it. So they're going to cook in vegetable oils, canola oils, those kinds of things. So be really careful with all of those when you eat out. Just assume they're going to be unhealthy. Magda says, I've been low carb diet for 4 years. Lately, my blood glucose is higher than normal. So eggs, butter. So that's something interesting, Magda. I have some people that do have a problem with coffee. Coffee's a stimulant. I am not going to tell someone you can't have coffee, but it is something to test and experiment with. Some people are very sensitive to coffee. It can raise glucose and insulin. So it's definitely something to consider. I have had people test themselves. They take themselves off. They do an elimination trial, and their glucose becomes beautiful. So I hate to admit that or suggest it because I like my coffee, but sometimes that has to happen. That's terrible. But it sometimes happens. The other thing is how much cream, how many eggs. Like, just because we can have eggs doesn't mean we can have 6 eggs and then 16 ounces of steak and da-da-da-da-da. So, like, everything matters. So it's about proper nutrition, proper amounts. So make sure you're not overeating protein. Okay? Other questions? Anybody else have a question this morning? I told y'all it was going to be pretty short, but it's pretty simple. We overeat carbs. We break down those carbs into glucose. It triggers insulin. It stores fat. We eventually become insulin resistant. We become diabetic. That's the normal, natural progression. So, that may be a good topic for next week, Jeannie. Type 1s are becoming insulin resistant. It's being termed double diabetes. So type 1s are becoming type 2s. So they're having both kinds of diabetes. They have to have insulin, but because every time they go in, their insulin levels are increased because their glucose continues to worsen. It's also related to your periods and your hormones, because insulin is a massive driver of those hormones. Low carbing is your only way to go in that case, because nothing's going to stop the resistance. There is no magic fix for resistance. The problem is, Jeannie, that type 1s are really at risk using low carb and insulin, because you can't stop the insulin. Like, you just can't stop insulin. So you have to work with a knowledgeable prescriber to help reduce your insulin doses properly and carefully while you eliminate the carbohydrates. But eliminating the carbs is the only way to get rid of insulin resistance. There are a few products that can help. Some people will prescribe metformin, for instance, but again, there's not any way to fix insulin resistance except to get rid of the problem causing the insulin levels going up. For a type 1, that means we have to reduce the insulin use, and the only way to do that is to quit chasing carbs, and that means not eat them. But it's very important that you work with a very knowledgeable prescriber, and there aren't many. I've had patients come to me, type 1 patients come to me to see me simply because their endos fired them when they asked to help them reduce their carbs so that they don't have to use as much insulin. So it can be rather difficult to find a good prescriber. Nancy, I don't recommend kinds of salt. I just tell people you have to know where your nutrition comes from. You have to have sodium, you have to have chloride, you have to have iodine. So you choose. But iodine is not in Redmond's. So I don't have a preference where you get your salt. You just have to get the nutrients that you need. Okay? But salt helps lower insulin. So that helps a little bit. All right, y'all. Good questions today. I hope this discussion helps. If you have insulin resistance or diabetes, or if you know someone that does, share this. This is one of our shorter videos, and it may be quite helpful. Debbie says, I learned more from you in a few months than from docs and dietitians in years. Yes, me too. Like, I've learned more in the last probably 5 years about nutrition than I learned in school ever, or from other prescribers. So y'all have a great day. Enjoy your warm, sunny day, I hope, where you are, because it's gorgeous here. Y'all have a wonderful afternoon, and I'll see you next week. And maybe next week we'll talk more about double diabetes. Bye, y'all.